Afternoon briefing. I'm Patricia Carvelis. Coming up, the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Ken Wyatt, joins me to mark NAIDOC Week, plus newly appointed Shadow Minister Ed Husic. But first, here are the top stories we're following. The coronavirus job seeker supplement to be extended beyond Christmas, but at a lower rate. Scott Morrison says he won't take disciplinary action against ministers featured in a Four Corners investigation. And excitement over news of a coronavirus vaccine, which may have a 90% success rate. The federal government has announced it will extend the job seeker unemployment benefit at a lower rate until the end of March next year. The $815 a fortnight payment will be reduced to $715 a fortnight from next month. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says it's a necessary measure to continue the economic recovery from the COVID-19 recession.
We cannot allow the lifeline that has been extended to also now hold Australia back as we move into the next phases of recovery. We've always been clear that we would move through various phases, and we've announced changes to other elements of the supports that have been put in place by the government.
It's been a busy afternoon with Western Sydney Labor MP Ed Husic being named as the new Shadow Minister for Agriculture and Resources. He replaces Joel Fitzgibbon. Now, Mr Fitzgibbon today resigned from the Labor frontbench, saying the party has lost voters because of its climate change policies. Ed Husic joins me now. Congratulations. You are, of course, a regular, but you've been kind of promoted now that you're a Shadow Minister onto this program, so thanks for joining me.
My great pleasure.
You said today that you're happy to be able to be responsible for two industries that have been the bedrock of the Australian economy. What do you want to do with this role?
Well, I think if people look at my track record, I care a lot about policy. I think deeply about issues, but more importantly, I listen to people. And so from my point of view, I'll be spending a lot of time basically catching up with people, with those that care deeply about agriculture and resources across a wide range of areas, taking on board what they have to say and learning. But you learn through listening, and that's really where I'll be headed. But I do feel very strongly that both these portfolios, as I said in my remarks today, Patricia, they have contributed a lot in terms of the economy, but especially in terms of helping people pay their bills, build a family, build a great life, create a great job for themselves. So, I approach this job with a lot of respect for those portfolios.
Did you know Joel Fitzgibbon was going to go before today?
I woke up a backbencher. I turned up to caucus. Joel told me that he was about to make a big announcement, and that's when I knew. So I had no inkling until the caucus, like a lot of my colleagues, and we got told at caucus that Joel was going.
What do you make of him resigning today on these issues? Clearly a lot of the spotlight was on the government after Four Corners, and then Joel Fitzgibbon made this decision and seemed to take some of that oxygen and focus it on Labor. Was that a wise decision?
Well, as I said in my introductory in terms of the press conference that we had with Anthony today, I'd made the point that I've known Joel, well before politics. He's someone who's been a friend of mine well before politics, and if I'd had my choice, I would love to be able to serve in a shadow cabinet, and more importantly, in a cabinet with Joel. So it's a day of mixed emotions in terms of I've been itching to come back to the front bench.
I know, but that wasn't my question. It was about his timing and putting the focus on Labor. Was it wise?
Any time you have to take the stand that Joel did and the way that he did, these are difficult decisions that get made. And I respect the fact that he said, look, I'm taking this course of action. He respects the primacy of shadow cabinet, and he understands this is the point at which he needs to go.
Anthony Albanese was asked at his press conference about some of these disputes over policy. He wouldn't answer whether Labor will take a medium-term emissions reduction target to the election. Do you think you should?
Okay, well, this is day one, so I'm going to take a bit of time, as I said in my earlier remarks, if you don't mind, to take that time to listen, to learn, and I'll be more than willing to have these type of conversations down the track. But as I said, it's day one, still got to get the feet under the table.
Okay, so you're not sure whether Labor, just want to clarify,
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say
Well,
that.
you're not ready to say yet, is what you're saying.
No. I'm saying that this is day one, and I'd like the opportunity to obviously get across a lot more in terms of talking with the people that care about both these portfolios in terms of agriculture and resources, and I'm more than happy to come back and have a chat with you, in the coming weeks.
After resigning, Joel Fitzgibbon said the party had lost voters because of its climate change policies. Do you agree?
I have to say, this is probably one thing that Joel and I don't necessarily agree on. I think it's very hard to be black and white about these things. What I will say is that I respect the fact that there are a lot of people that are working, particularly in resources, that want people to respect the fact that they're in those roles and respect the fact that they want job security and respect the fact that we don't talk lightly about their futures. And we need to be able to work through those things and, importantly, work with them on it. So, and as someone who represents a large part of Western Sydney where there are a lot of blue-collar workers, I think I bring that to the Shadow Cabinet table, and I look forward to speaking up on those issues within the Shadow Cabinet.
Joel Fitzgibbon said he quit the Shadow Cabinet so he can continue to agitate from the backbench on climate change and other policy, including tax. Is that something you're worried about? Is that going to lead to more disputes in the party?
Well, you and I are used to having very straightforward and direct discussion. So I'll say this. You're asking me a lot of questions about Joel. If you really want to ask Joel's opinion, I would recommend that, you might want to have a yak with him.
He's come out with criticism. I mean, that's the point. You would ask too, if you were me. I would be surprised. You're a smart guy. You'd be asking too.
I totally get it. But, we can either do an interview where I'm asking or responding to questions about Joel, or you can just interview him.
No, I want to know what you think, though, because you're going to be on the front bench. So what you think on these issues is actually what I'm interested in.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, it's day one. I'm just basically going to get into the role, and as I also indicated to you, I'm more than happy to come back at a later point to have a much more extensive discussion.
Labor has been...
I think, look, can I just say this?
Yeah.
I'll just say this. Look, clearly the party has said, and Anthony has said, and the party is driving towards net zero by 2050, right? So there'll be a combination of things between now and then in terms of technology change that's occurring. We've still got to get through Glasgow. There are still a lot of milestones we've got to reach. So asking me as a newly minted Shadow Minister what I think, given that long time frame, I just say, watch this space.
All right, I'm watching, as you know. That's
all
I do.
Oh, I know.
Let's talk about the US election. What are the lessons for Labor? Are there lessons? I know it's an entirely different, context, different country, different issues. We've got to be always careful about analysis. But are there any lessons on issues around climate change and other big issues?
I think you really did capture it in terms of your question about the variation in the systems. We've got a compulsory voting system. They've got a voluntary one. They have variations between states about how their votes are done, right? So I approach answering your question with that, number one. Two, I think the very big lesson in terms of what the Democrats did is that they did a very big thing in terms of mobilising grassroots, getting right down to neighbourhoods and speaking with people directly. I think we've always got to be able to do that. I think, I'm careful about drawing too much out of their election, but what I have said previously, and I'll restate, you've got to be out there with a core set of policies. You've got to keep it really simple, and you've got to have a climate that works in your favour. When you look at how Labor has gone from opposition to government, and to have a very strong leader, and you see Albo out there doing the work in terms of shaping up the opposition, the approaches, the policy. I think that's really important. Learning from history, really important in the Australian context. But obviously, I think the big thing out of the US election, to be quite frank with you, is breathing a sigh of relief. Not necessarily having politics dictated by a Twitter stream, as we've been accustomed to over the last 4 years. And as I said in the show last week with you, I think it's really important that we have our friends in the US value us as their friends. And I think I was deeply concerned over the course of the last presidential term. I think there were a number of things that happened where you had to think whether or not our US friends valued us as much as we valued them, and it only sort of changed in the latter part of the presidential term. But I'm absolutely confident that President-elect Joe Biden will take a different approach, and he'll emphasise his strong admiration for our country and will demonstrate that not just in word but in deed.
Christian Porter and Alan Tudge have been kept on as ministers. The Prime Minister has addressed the Four Corners revelations. Do you think they should be sacked?
Look, let me take it a step back, if I may. There are a lot of people who come to this place, regardless of their political party. They come here to do good. They're driven by a sense of good. And I would hate to think, as many people in the broader public, that they're not able to do their best if there is a culture that doesn't allow that to happen. And there is, I think, out of this, a very important message that needs to be sent to all political parties. One, to take it seriously. Two, that this shouldn't be tolerated. Three, that there are processes in place to deal with things when acts move outside of absolute rock-solid expectations about better behaviour, and I think that needs to happen. In terms of your answer, that's that will be something that the Prime Minister has to account for himself, but I think we all need to take out of this a very strong signal that has been sent that we must do better, particularly for people in vulnerable positions.
Thank you so much for joining me, and you're going to be back again. I know you will, Ed Husic. See you later.
No doubt. There is no doubt.
There is no doubt. That's the new Shadow Minister for Agriculture and Resources, Ed Husic, and I've had a few people saying I should ask him if he's going to get back on Twitter. He's very big on Instagram, so that's where you can find him. The Minister for Indigenous Australians, Ken White, is my next guest this afternoon. Ken White, welcome.
It's great to be with you, Patricia.
This year's NAIDOC Week theme is Always Was, Always Will Be. What does that mean to you?
It means not only land, it is the 65,000 years of customary practice, our law, our stories, our history, our culture, the arts, dance, the achievements of surviving for that lengthy period of time and being resilient until settlement. Things changed, but we're still here and we're still a strong cultural range of nations across the geographic diversity of Australia.
I've spoken to some coalition MPs off the record, they haven't gone on the record, that say that the term is divisive. Do you think it's divisive?
No. Look, it's when they chose that, whilst most people will focus on land, all the discussions I've been in have been the absolute diversity of our lifestyle in the total context. See, that's why we need to have our story told, our history told, but people getting to know Indigenous Australians in the same way they study the history of other nations, other groups. Because if they did that, they wouldn't be saying the term is divisive, because that means they've just focused in on land, not every element that is equally important in connection. And I think that's where it's sad that they've not taken the time to extend their knowledge.
You've now received this report from Marcia Langton and Tom Calma in relation to a sort of body to be established to represent Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. When will you release it publicly?
Actually, as soon as I'm going through it at the moment, I will take it to Cabinet and then we will make a decision about its release subsequently. But I'm very keen for stage 2 to occur, and that is consultation on what the 3 groups have come back with. I am pleased with the report. I am pleased with the breadth of thinking, and I'm pleased that I chose a range of people in conjunction with Tom and Marcia who were at both ends of the continuum. Those who are strong Uluru Statement, those who had a different view. And collectively, they've shown the leadership in what they believe is a way forward for our people at the community level, a regional approach and then a national approach. But all of that will come, and certainly once it's released, I'll be happy to come back on your show and discuss some of those elements that are within the report that you're interested in, Patricia.
Do you have a preference in terms of the options going out for consultation?
No, I don't, because I could do if I operated without our people. But I want to work with our people to find the solutions that I said we would do through co-design, and I want to remain committed to co-designing and at the same time working with all of my colleagues in this place to give them the understanding of what Aboriginal people across this nation are seeking.
So will you end up legislating before the election?
Yes, we will.
So you will definitely legislate for a body to represent Aboriginal people before the election?
Yes, I will.
Okay. And does that mean that the establishment of the body, after you establish it through legislation, will also happen in that timeframe?
Well, it'll be, and I reflected back on this with the agency because I said to them, my recollection of the establishment of ATSEC was this. There was an interim group until they consolidated the processes, because I was an ATSEC regional chair, and I know the processes we went through in order to set up the structures. Then that took a little bit of time, but nevertheless, it gave us the opportunity to put in place an organisation that gave us regional, and the regional structures were brilliant because we were able to make decisions. I think the thing that we shouldn't have had was the funding control and some of that program implementation, because it let state and territory governments off the hook in that process. This one, I have already indicated to state and territory ministers that I want to link with their bodies that they have already established that have been operating and who are voices to those state and territory governments, to link with the voice.
I know a lot of the people, of course, who are sort of key members of that Uluru Statement from the Heart advocacy group leaders. And it seems to me that if you do go ahead, as you've promised in this interview, and legislate for an Indigenous representative body, that they will say that that's the wrong order, that you need to have it in the Constitution first. If they strongly oppose it, these very prominent people, will you still go ahead?
In legislation, yes, because I've given that undertaking, and so has our government. And I've been talking to three very distinct groups who have strong positions on this, because I always said that I would do the voice first, and then I will consider constitutional recognition after that point. Because when I travel around the country, and Patricia, you've seen some of this yourself, where you go to a community and you think, Australia is a first world country. Why are people living with this? Why are they living with water that nobody else in a city would ever drink? It's all of those factors that is driving me quite strongly on having a local voice. It's not detracting from the Uluru Statement. The voice was never defined in that process. This is about the voices of local people as well as those who currently sit within peak structures. It doesn't matter where the peak structures are, who governments often go to, but don't see the evidence of what happens on the ground. And that's what I want to try and change, so that I get members of this parliament out into their regions and into communities. And a lot are now doing that. And it's been really refreshing in my time in this place to see the way in which federal members are engaging with Indigenous organisations and people.
I just want to change the topic if we can. Should Aboriginal communities, remote Aboriginal communities, be opened up now that COVID is under control in Victoria and New South Wales?
Look, what I gleaned out of the whole COVID experience in working with Ministers for Aboriginal Affairs, my colleague Greg Hunt, was that communities wanted to be safe. I was on a program with you previously when we talked about the APY lands, and I said they wrote saying that they want to close their borders to protect themselves. So across the country, we've got communities that are keen to open, but they are also worried about the impact of COVID, and they're taking measured steps in unlocking their communities, allowing interactions in large centres close to them, but they're not opening up their communities on a broader context. And I can understand that, given access to health services, access to hospitals. So the leadership at all levels has been outstanding. That's why we've had limited numbers across this nation. The ACCHOs have played a major role, the Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation.
And should that continue until there's a vaccine?
Sorry?
And should that approach, in your view, continue until there's a vaccine?
I think it should. We should be very measured and very cautious so as not to put communities at risk. But Australia today, Minister Hunt announced that we've had, I think, 3 consecutive days where we've had no new cases. Now that augurs well for our future, but the vaccinations that are being developed look promising, and we've both seen media reports in respect to that. So I'm very optimistic that those vaccines now, through trials, are showing the efficacy, but they've still got some other steps to go through in those trials, and then Australia has certainly secured a supply that will help people in Australia. And
would Indigenous Australians get priority to get that vaccine?
They'll be towards that front end, along with those who are in the frontline services, the elderly. It'll be the most vulnerable first, and then Minister Hunt will work through with his key people, including states and territories, on how we roll the vaccines out across the nations. We do this with influenza A or any of the flu vaccinations we give each winter. We encourage the most vulnerable to go and get theirs first. Then we encourage other Australians to also visit their GP or a pharmacy to have the same vaccination. The same would apply in this model as well.
Minister, how quickly can an overhaul of how Indigenous funding is delivered start achieving results?
Look, I'm starting to see a number of programs across the nation changing, and I won't go into specifics because there are some elements that I want to explore in more detail given the Productivity Commission evaluation report. We do have to evaluate to see if a program is effective and if it's delivering an outcome. But at the same time, we're going to have to make some tough decisions. If something isn't working, it's not delivering, and we have needs, then we have to look at how do we re-engineer, or in some tough cases, what do we cease in order to fund the priorities that we have to address through closing the gap.
Just finally, I wonder, did you watch the Four Corners story last night?
Yeah, I did, and I looked at the timeline of when that occurred, and it certainly was dealt with by Prime Minister Turnbull because I was in government then, and certainly Prime Minister Morrison addressed that in the House today and has reiterated that every member should adhere to the standards and the relationships that are important, and that we care for the vulnerable.
Okay then, why did Barnaby Joyce lose his job but these 2 ministers didn't, given it happened during this time?
I think the decisions of the Prime Minister then were relevant in terms of time and context, and both last night their time was in the last term of government. In this term of government, I've worked very closely with both those ministers in working to achieve the outcomes that I need for Indigenous Australians. And today, 2 pieces of legislation, amendments to the Native Title Bill led by the Attorney-General, have gone through this House, and they'll have beneficial outcomes.
Do you think the information revealed was in the public interest?
Look, I think one of the aspects to the exposure of the private life of anybody in a public circumstance needs to be weighed up in terms of the gravity. And on that basis, and it doesn't matter whether it's in the corporate world or whether it's within public life serving in the layers of government, we have to look at the gravity of that and then deal with matters. And certainly I give Malcolm Turnbull credit for the way in which he addressed that fairly promptly.
Yeah, absolutely the private issue. People can have relationships. The issue, though, is it appropriate to be having relationships with any staff if you're a minister? Not just your staff in your own office, but any staff, given the power imbalance. Do you think it's appropriate? My short answer to that is no. And why isn't it appropriate? We should focus on our jobs. Why isn't it appropriate? Because all of us
and I'm going to use everybody in both chambers of the House, are put there on the basis of how people see us as having integrity, having a focus on representing them, and being focused on the business of government, or if you're in opposition, challenging government on its policies, not in the minds of the public to do what we saw exposed on that Four Corners program. So this is about reform, which Malcolm put into place, and I think that we're seeing people adhere to that.
Ken White, thanks for joining me. Have a happy NAIDOC week. I know you wore a fantastic shirt in the Parliament, so I really enjoyed watching that too. It's worth looking up the pictures. Thanks for joining us.
I'm sorry that I came in a white shirt for you, Patricia, but it's always a pleasure being on your program, and a happy NAIDOC week as well. Ken
White there, the Minister for Indigenous Australians, and he was wearing an amazing shirt with an Indigenous design that's worth looking on social media for, or of course any of the websites. There's hope of a breakthrough in finding a viable coronavirus vaccine. Drug manufacturer Pfizer says its treatment is more than 90% effective based on initial trial results. It's involved more than 40,000 people in 6 countries, and no safety concerns have been raised. Europe correspondent Linton Besser reports.
11 months after the outbreak of a new viral pneumonia was first reported in China, the first signs of a potential vaccine.
Now we can credibly tell them, I think we can see light at the end of the tunnel.
Drug giant Pfizer has released early results of its 43,000 volunteer human trial. No serious side effects so far, and a 90% effectiveness.
It's such a great day for science and humanity. You know, I've never felt professionally such a moment of joy to put an end to this dreadful pandemic.
I have to say, this is really a very important scientific breakthrough. I'm certain of that.
Uncertainties remain. This is early data, and the results are yet to be subjected to independent scientific scrutiny.
Soon, the expectation is the FDA will run a process of rigorous reviews and approvals. And the process must also be grounded in science and fully transparent, so the American people can have every confidence that any approved vaccine is safe and effective.
In London, the British Prime Minister cautioned there were still many hurdles ahead.
It is crucial that we do not overdo it. We cannot let our enthusiasm tonight run away with us, folks. I'm very, very sorry to say this. It's more vital than ever now that we follow the basics, that we wait and see whether this vaccine lives up to its promise.
If these results hold true after scrutiny by the scientific community and drug regulators, the next challenge will be distribution. How to get the vaccine to billions of people. Pfizer is planning to apply for early authorisation to move into large-scale manufacturing, promising the production of 1.3 billion doses next year. The announcement had an immediate effect on the market.
All we've heard for the last 4 or 5 months is rising infection rates, rising hospitalisations, rising casualty rates. So this news is very welcome, and markets have seized upon that.
With the virus still rife across the world and millions of people living under lockdowns, at last, a glimmer of hope. Linton Besser, ABC News, London.
Time now for finance with Alicia Barry. And Alicia, vaccine hopes boosted the share market. What happened today?
Well, as you heard from Linton Besser's piece there, the optimism started in the US overnight, and it certainly flowed through to trade across the Asian session, which Australia is included in. We saw the Australian markets touch their highest level in early trade since early March this year, but the trade gains did pare back a little, and by the close of trade, the ASX 200 index was up 2/3%. But it's where the money was transferred and I guess directed today that was most telling. We certainly saw the travel, real estate and education sectors push sharply higher, and that was at the expense of healthcare, consumer discretionary and staple stocks and technology stocks. It seems as though there's quite a big rotation away from those safe havens of health and consumer stocks that have really sustained investors throughout the pandemic. One example, of course, is Webjet was up 13%, Qantas was up 8%, shopping centre group Centre, the owner of Westfield in Australia, was up 14.5%, and this is, in contrast to the big falls that we saw throughout the pandemic fear-gripped times of the market. In contrast today, those consumer stocks which have been very popular, especially online retailers like Temple and Webster, down 20% today. Domino's fell 11%, and Fisher & Paykel is their healthcare space, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, actually fell 12% today because it makes medical equipment, including respirators. So there certainly was a big rotation in the way that traders saw the market, and they certainly appear to be pricing in the fact that we will see a successful vaccine rollout in the near future, today at least. Whether or not that continues into tomorrow's session is always up for question, but also worth noting because risk was in favour, if you like. The Australian dollar saw some further buying, and it was sitting just below 73 US cents a little while ago.
Thanks, Alicia. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says he won't be taking any disciplinary action against two senior ministers who featured in last night's Four Corners investigation. The program revealed that the 2018 so-called bonk ban was implemented because then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull had concerns about multiple frontbench MPs, including Christian Porter and Alan Tudge, being intimate with staffers. Mr Morrison says the issues were dealt with at the time and he won't be taking any further action.
And in terms of what their conduct is as one of my ministers, since they have served in my cabinet, there are no matters before me regarding their conduct while they've served in my cabinet. And indeed, I'm not aware of any conduct, nor was the previous Prime Minister, after the introduction of those standards. See, our government responded by putting in place standards that don't exist in many of your newsrooms. They don't exist. Those sort of standards between employers and employees don't exist in many workplaces around this country. I'll tell you what, they exist in mine.
Minister Tudge has apologised for his actions. The Attorney-General has denied he had a relationship with a woman in the bar and says he doesn't believe anything else will come out as a result of the report.
The allegation is that I had a relationship with a person that a description was given of me being close to in a bar, and I didn't. I can't comment about what people might want to do to try and damage me or damage the government, right? That is part and parcel of politics. But I haven't conducted myself in a way that I think would lead people to provide that sort of complaint about me.
Earlier, I spoke to Kate Ellis, who is the former Labor Minister for the Status of Women. She told me the experiences of this type of behaviour differed for elected women compared to political staffers.
I think it's really different for female MPs and female staff, and it's something a few women have told me that, I mean, there's a lot of focus on the treatment of our female MPs, and that's been publicly debated. But the issue is that if you're a staff member, none of those male MPs are hoping to get your vote for the leadership or for their promotion or to join the ministry. So there is a much greater power imbalance that exists with female staff members than with female MPs. And I suspect that they are probably the ones that see the worst of the behaviour in the building.
The Prime Minister said today when questioned in his press conference that it happens on both sides of politics. Is he right?
Oh, I don't think anyone is suggesting that this is limited to one minister or one party. My honest opinion is I think that Labor are better because there's more of a commitment to gender equality. But I have no doubt, and particularly historically, that we would have seen awful cases coming from all sides of politics.
And now it brings us to what's happening right now in recent years. Clearly, the former Prime Minister introduced what is known as a bonk ban, whatever, it's colloquially known as. Actually, in fact, the Prime Minister today said he didn't really like the terminology. It is a bit weird, the terminology. But the idea behind that, it's about the power imbalance, right? Is that power imbalance still there, do you think?
Look, the reality, if you are a young female staff member and you're employed by a male minister, you're relying on that male minister for your ongoing employment. People can be hired and fired easily in politics. You're relying upon them for any future promotions, but you're also potentially relying upon them to be your champion and help forge a pathway for your own pre-selection. So the power imbalance is not just like any other workplace. It is massive, and in many cases you're indebted to them. That is potentially really dangerous. I do think that the one thing that is noticeable is that I haven't heard the commentary today on what about those women who were forced out or who felt that they could no longer work in that environment. I haven't heard the concern or any sort of recourse or any sort of reaching out. And, it was incredibly brave for people to stand up, particularly noting the power imbalance, and to call things out so publicly. I would hope that as part of the conversation, we'd have a discussion about not just what we do for those women, but what we do for any other women who might find themselves in those circumstances. And let's make sure that they're treated better and not forced out of the occupation altogether.
Just finally, how much do you think party loyalty acts as a barrier to open discussion of these sorts of incidents or relationships?
I think it's a really important consideration, and I think that's one of the reasons why any sort of system that's put in place, we should have a system through the MOPS Act, we should have a system through the departments, but we also need to recognise that party loyalty is real and it exists, and that's why the parties have got to take responsibility and have their own systems. They've got to have someone that you can go to, some system in place that people can have faith will be dealt with properly and professionally, but probably that people may not feel comfortable taking it outside of the boundaries of their own party.
Do you think the response we've seen from politicians today has failed the women who have talked, and particularly the one woman who's gone on the record?
Oh, look, I think we've had a lot of people stand up and say that they too believe we need safe workplaces. But I think that until there is recognition of just how big the disparity in power between a minister and a junior staffer is, then we're not going to take this issue seriously. And I haven't seen people standing up and recognising that that is the fundamental issue here. It's about the fact that people cannot have equal power in that relationship if the male involved is a senior minister.
You can catch my full interview with Kate Ellis tonight on Radio National Drive or later on the ABC Listen app. Time now for my political panel, National Senator Matt Canavan and Labor MP Christy McBain. Welcome to both of you, and beginning with you, Christy. What do you make of what Kate Ellis had to say? Is this like a big cultural issue in the parliament?
Look, I think what we all have to do as politicians is acknowledge that this is a position of privilege and it's a position of power, that everybody coming to work should feel safe and secure in their workplace, and that we need to uphold the highest of standards as elected officials and make sure that there is no, place where women feel unsafe to come forward or feel like they have to be involved in some way with their bosses, because for them it's promotion and it's a job.
Matt Canavan, is it appropriate for a minister to have relationships with a staff member, even if it is outside of the minister's actual office?
Sorry, just repeat that, like outside the office. Look,
yeah, so like okay. Maybe they don't work for you; they work for another minister.
Look, obviously it's best or ideal not to complicate work relationships in those ways. In reality, we're all human beings, Patricia, and human relationships get complex and difficult at times. I have to say, Patricia, I think the ABC has unnecessarily besmirched itself over the last 24 hours.
On what basis?
Don't watch a lot of... Yeah, I'm happy to explain that. I don't watch a lot of the ABC anymore. Unfortunately, I used to be a big watcher, but, there's so much of this rubbish and gotcha journalism now, and it's not really a broadcaster that engages seriously on public issues. It's always seems to be about getting people or assassinating people's characters. I mean, bringing up stuff that Christian Porter did when he was at university. I mean, like really, like you guys are the national broadcaster. You know, you should be serving a high purpose in that.
So I think it's very unfortunate. Let's talk about the actual allegations in relation to relationship with staff.
There are allegations that were aired on your network, Patricia.
I'm asking about the relationships with staff and what you think about that.
Yeah, as I said, I don't think it's ideal, and I think it's unfortunate it's had to be codified in this sort of way. But as I say, I mean, you know, this is workplaces and these relationships are issues that all workplaces have to handle. I don't actually think that Parliament is in any way that much different from other workplaces. There are some unique pressures here that go with the high-stress jobs, although other industries are high-stress, the time away from home, and those things need to be factored in. And we're all trying to do things better over time. So, you know, I feel a lot of sympathy for those caught up in these circumstances. I don't know if trawling through people's private lives on national TV are the best way to handle these issues for all of those involved. Because there was no, I mean, I didn't watch the show, as I said, but I haven't seen any reports of harassment or illegal behaviour. But as I say, sometimes people get hurt in human relationships.
Let's go to the power imbalance then, because it's about power imbalance, right? So if you're a junior staffer, minister's got a lot more power than you. If you're having a relationship with that minister, the minister's got to be the one that goes, this isn't appropriate. This person's working for me. They're accountable to me.
Yeah. As I say, it's not ideal, and that's what is reflected in the code of conduct. At the same time, I don't, you know, all these situations have to be evaluated on their individual circumstances, and I don't think it's right and proper to say every female staffer or every male staffer is without their own agency or responsibility or can make their own choices. That's not fair on them either. But there's no doubt that is a risk, and that's why the Ministerial Code of Conduct has been updated. That's why we have strengthened the complaints processes in this Parliament to deal with these issues as they crop up.
Okay.
And those are things that should continue. But as I said, you can't see the reporting from the ABC over the last 24 hours as anything else than an attempt to assassinate some people, particular people's characters.
Does that mean that you think anything anyone did at university, like for instance, you know, things Julia Gillard did in a previous life, that should always be discounted? That should never be part of...
What concerns me, Patricia, there doesn't seem to be the application of any kind of public interest test here from the national broadcaster. I mean, obviously there would be certain circumstances of illegal conduct or some such which could be relevant. But again, going on the reports I've seen, there seems to be, you know, some third party or second-hand claims and allegations, presumably going back decades. I don't know how old Christian is. It's just, you know, it's beneath you. And I think it's embarrassing for the public broadcaster to be trawling through people's lives.
Does that mean you don't think there should be any trawling of any politician before they entered Parliament?
No, I didn't say that at all, Patricia. I just think there has to be a standard of public interest here applied, and I think seemingly the national broadcasters failed on that in the last 24 hours, which is very sad.
Christy, what do you think? Is it in the public interest?
Look, I'd have to take umbrage with what Matt's just said. I mean, the women in this story have a compelling story to tell. It's a journalist's role to follow that story and make sure that it does come to light. You know, without journalism, we wouldn't have heard about half the things that happened, which started off the Me Too movement. You know, we wouldn't have heard some of the things that have taken place in this building. And you know what? They have taken place and they should be acknowledged and they should be investigated. That's the role of journalists. That's the role of the public broadcaster. I don't think individuals get to decide what's in the public interest or not. That's the matter for the public. Whether they tune in or not is a decision for them.
There's no comparison to the Me Too movement here. I mean, there's no claims of harassment or any kind of
but you're
illegal
unsure
conduct
of
at all
that yet. How do you know whether you don't know whether that is the case as yet?
Well, the woman who did go on the record, but it's really hard to have a discussion if you haven't seen it, I've got to say, Matt Canavan, but the woman who went on camera and talks about her relationship with Alan Tudge clearly did feel like the power imbalance was a huge issue and ultimately was driven out of politics. Doesn't that concern you, that she was driven out of politics? A woman who was clearly very competent by all people's accounts who dealt with her?
Look, as I said before, I've got a lot of sympathy for that, but I don't look. This is what I really can't stand is. You've obviously done a program to assassinate someone's character. You've tried to draw up all of this crap, and then you get on the high horse and try and say, "Oh no, we're really trying to help this person." Don't give us that rubbish. I mean, we're not fools, and this is a clear attempt to try and introduce some kind of Americanisation to Australian politics. This is what happens all the time through the Senate confirmation process over there. We saw it with Brett Kavanaugh. Where's all those claims now? They've all gone once he got confirmed. And
well, they didn't go.
I'd hate to see that.
The claims didn't go.
I'd hate to see that. I'd hate to see that be imported to our politics, but that seems to be where the road is headed here, which is very unfortunate.
Christy, is it an Americanisation, that claim that's just been made by Matt Canavan?
No, I don't think so. And again, I think you have to look at the story that's being told here. There are women that have come forward that had concerns about the relationships that took place and the overall treatment of women within Parliament House. And I think that is in the national interest. It is about making sure we're having these conversations so things are different in the future. I mean, I'm new to this place, but I certainly want to make sure that there is a standard going forward, that women feel safe and secure coming into the building, that there are more women putting their hand up for pre-selection, for leadership roles, for promotion in the staffing ranks. I think that we should all be having that discussion. I mean, I don't think that there is a question here about the person involved. It's about how women feel in this. And ultimately, that's the thing that gets lost in these stories is, it becomes about all of the men. The story was about women.
I just want to change the topic, if we can, talk about a pretty significant policy that was announced, a reduced rate but still an extension of that higher supplement for the job seeker allowance. So that means it's till the end of March, but then after that we don't know what's going to happen. Matt Canavan, should it be permanently increased after that point?
Look, I don't know if we can afford to have it permanently increased. Patricia, our debt's going towards $1 trillion here at the Commonwealth level. I have been an advocate for an increase in the dole, but that was in a circumstance where we're heading back to a surplus. The coronavirus has destroyed all of those projections, so we have to look again at what we can afford as a nation. I mean, the sort of level that was before coronavirus, the level that people had sort of gotten around as a reasonable increase was $75 a fortnight, which would have cost around $5 billion a year. That's a lot of money in the current environment. And the most important thing right now is we get people back to work. There's enormous concerns from small businesses that they can't find people at the moment. They put out applications and just no one applying. And we can't continue with that environment when we've got to pay these bills, including our massive public debt.
Christy, what should it be permanently increased to? Labor's been critical of today's decision, but Matt Canavan says the debt's high. Can it be permanently increased in a realistic way?
Look, I think we're going to have that discussion because at this point in time, with the job seeker rate being scaled back, we've still got over 1 million people unemployed. That's scheduled to go up by another 160,000 people. That rate won't cover a lot of people's mortgages or their rents in some circumstances. So we're going to see a huge social problem starting to emerge if those jobs aren't available for people to take up and be filled. So look, I think there's going to have to be a sensible discussion going forward because I know that there is many people in my electorate who will not be able to pay rent or mortgage, and I'm not in a capital city. So, if it's the case in the regions, I'm sure it's the case in the capital cities that we're going to see huge housing stress shortly.
Just very briefly, Linda Burney saying that the government has voted against Labor's motion to hang the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags in the Parliament. It's obviously NAIDOC week. Do you think, why is that the case, Matt Canavan?
Look, our Parliament, both, I believe, houses, but certainly the Senate has the Australian flag in it. A decision was made around 30 years ago to put the Australian flag in the Senate because it was the flag that represents our entire nation. I think that's the appropriate symbol.
Sure, but Aboriginal Australians were first here 60,000 years. Why shouldn't they be represented too? Particularly during NAIDOC week?
The national flag includes...
In their own flag.
The national flag is for all Australians, and I reject the position that was put forward by a Greens senator during the debate before in the Senate that somehow our Australian flag is a colonial flag. I'm proud of our flag. It's our national flag.
But if Aboriginal people feel like that, why wouldn't we respect that?
It's the one we should all unite about, and I think that's the appropriate flag to include in our chamber and fully support the government's decision.
Christy, can I just get a quick response from you?
Yeah, look, all three flags should be flown. It represents our traditional owners. It actually puts us on a path to real reconciliation, and there should be no question that all three flags should be flown.
So once we put a flag in the place, it's all right. I mean, you know, if you think the land's stolen, give it back. I mean, this sort of symbolism doesn't do anything to help Indigenous people. We've got to get back to actually focusing on what is important, not these symbols.
Do you think the land should be given back?
Like the Uluru Statement from the Heart, that'd be a good start if we implemented that.
How about if you're working towards healing a country that clearly needs some healing? Why wouldn't you think about respecting the first people, as I say, 60,000 years?
But this is the problem, Patricia. I mean, there's a lot of politicians who stand up at the start of their speeches and say, I want to recognise the land on which we meet as traditional owners. Well, give your house back, give your land back. You can... Canberra here has 99-year leases. Give them back to Indigenous people if you really believe that. It's all words, it's all symbols, and I hate that. I actually let's do practical things that can improve people's lives, because too many Indigenous people still live in third world conditions.
A lot of Indigenous people say they do find that acknowledgement actually, not all, but does actually mean something to them. Doesn't that matter?
Yeah, I find it massively hypocritical, particularly then when you get the same people, the same politicians, often from the Labor Party or the Greens, then when they choose to do, ignoring the voices of Aboriginal Australians, including, for example, on things like the Adani Carmichael mine, where the traditional owners voted 294 to 1 in favour of the mine, yet then the politicians go away and work hell to leather to stop the rights and views of Indigenous peoples being implemented.
All right. I'm going to have to leave it there. Thanks to both of you.
No worries.
National Senator Matt Canavan and Labor MP Christy McBain there. Returning to this afternoon's top story on the extension of the coronavirus supplement, I spoke to ACOS CEO Cassandra Goldie a little earlier. Cassandra Goldie, welcome.
Good afternoon, Patricia.
Are you satisfied with the 3-month extension?
Oh, this is exactly not the plan that we needed announced from the government today on JobSeeker. It ignores all the best advice from ACOS, from the business community, from the community sector more broadly, that we needed a permanent, adequate increase to JobSeeker locked in. And instead, what we've got is another cut to the income levels. Is going to happen at the end of the year, going into Christmas, the most expensive time of the year. And then again, in March, people are facing going back to that really brutal $40 a day. And so it's wrong on both levels. And we are really warning the government that if they go ahead with this plan, we are going to be facing a tsunami of financial distress going into the end of the year, as I say, at the most expensive time of the year. And we certainly have a real challenge on our hands when it comes to getting jobs back as well.
So how much do you think that cut of $100 a fortnight will affect people relying on the payment?
Well, people were already really distressed by the cuts that have already been made. As you know, Patricia, JobSeeker pre-COVID was just $40 a day. Finally, the government did absolutely the right thing and doubled the rate of JobSeeker to something more adequate. We had broad support for what the government had done. We could see that people were spending it on the essentials, on rent, on food. Retailers were reporting that they could see those dollars being spent on the essentials, helping to keep other people in jobs. And of course, now people have had a further cut to that amount just come in, where they're facing a further cut at the end of the year and then going right back to $40 a day. And so high levels of distress. I've had lots of contact from people. People are very, very worried. And of course, we know everybody says they're concerned about people's mental health, and one of the most important things you can do to protect people's mental health is to give people basic financial security, and that is not what we've got today.
When should the government put a permanent figure to the payment?
Well, it needs to be done yesterday, Patricia. It should have been done a long time ago. We've had ongoing support, really clear support from so many different quarters. This is not party political. It's not a left or right issue. You've got right through the business community, the union movement, the community sector. We've got all the leading economists who said, pre the budget just announced, that one of the most important things they wanted to see in the budget was a permanent adequate increase to JobSeeker, both because they do know that people really need those dollars. Deloitte was very clear. They said, for example, when they did the work on what it meant, that it would both be making sure that people had the right supports to be able to get back into employment, and it was helping to keep, many, many people in jobs. They estimated if you cut JobSeeker right back at the end of the financial year, back to the $40 a day, it would be costing about 145,000 jobs over the next 2 years. And so the jobs are at stake here, as well as the mental health and the basic financial security for 1.6 million people right now. If you include parents who are also receiving this payment, we're up to about 2.3 million people affected, plus over 1 million children. This is very serious. We are warning the government today, please do not go ahead with this plan of a cut at Christmas time.
Okay.
And the level of uncertainty is really distressing
Can you
for people.
see why the government is trying to gradually reduce the payment rather than cutting it off entirely, or kind of it's obviously tapering it down now?
Well, I don't accept that this is good policy at all. I mean, the government, it seemed enthusiastically to champion, the need to bring forward eye-watering levels of tax cuts, and we know that the majority of those tax cuts are going to be benefiting people on higher incomes. 2/3 of the value of those tax cuts will be going to men. That is all locked in and legislated, and the government bent over backwards to deliver security, certainty for the tax cut agenda. And when all of their tax cut plan is in place, people on $200,000 will be getting a tax cut of $11,000 per year, Patricia. And so this is absolutely a chalk and cheese when it comes to how the government is responding to the interests associated with people on higher incomes, in contrast to people on very low incomes. We've got so many single mums affected by this, their children. Where is the responsibility of the government to understand that both from a moral, from a fairness and from an economic case, the most important thing they could have done was to deliver financial security and that permanent adequate increases we've all been calling for a long time.
So in terms of the permanent increase that you're looking for, do you still read it that the government's open to doing that in March?
Well, look, the government was pushed on what its plan is beyond March. We didn't get an answer on that. I'm here in Parliament today. We all will be continuing to urge the government to do the right thing. I want to thank all of the people who have spoken up about this, particularly people directly affected, Patricia. And, many people directly affected by it. It's terrible to face unemployment, but to be prepared to speak about what it's like. And I certainly hope that the government understands that this will not go away. They might want to, continue to drip feed a cut and, try and get it back to $40 a day. For what purpose? For what purpose? That's what we ask. Here we should be giving priority to providing the right supports for people who need it the most. The government likes to use the rhetoric of "we've got your back." Well, this is a moment where they've clearly turned their back, and it's the wrong way that they've moved, and we certainly are warning them they must turn it around, and we will continue to do everything we can. And I want to thank all those, including from the business community, who have been out there today saying the same thing.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
ACOS CEO Cassandra Goldie there. Well, that's afternoon briefing for today. If you missed the start of the program, you can catch up on iView. You just search for afternoon briefing. And a couple of the interviews to look out for include the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Ken Wyatt, who committed to legislate for an Indigenous body before the next election. That's quite key, making the commitment about a timeline for when a representative body would be legislated. Of course, it's not what people who support the Uluru Statement from the Heart want. They would prefer it, they want it to be in the Constitution Constitution, but he talks about legislation. He also said Indigenous Australians will be towards the front end of those able to receive a coronavirus vaccine first too. And on Four Corners, Minister White told me it isn't appropriate for MPs to have relationships with any staffers. We should focus on our jobs. We also spoke to the newly appointed Shadow Resources and Agriculture Minister, Ed Husic. That's worth catching up with too. More on our top stories up next. I'm Patricia Karvelis. I'll be back at 4 p.m. tomorrow. Stay with us here on ABC News.